do 360 video now for live streaming. That'd be cool.
Well, haven't you always been able to do that? I just had to fuck with the video input stuff.
Maybe. I should figure it out, but I haven't yet. All right, let's get started. Oh, where's my chat? Not wide enough. There it is. All right. Let it focus on me. And 3, 2. Hello, you have found yourself in Read Between the Lines, where we take you behind the cover and between the lines of our favorite books. Joining me today is Sydney, the man who cannot be stopped on his drift through life. Key. Tell him what you're about, Sydney Key.
About drifting, man. Especially this week. After reading this book, I'm feeling a little aimless. I'll be frank, but we'll get into that.
Look, so I don't know if you know this. I chose this book because it was on a podcast. I listened to Bigger Pockets, and I've talked to you about Bigger Pockets before. They're like real estate investing and all that kind of stuff. Though I guess I did just do advertising for a competing podcast. But I was listening, and it was kind of hilarious because this guy was talking, and this is a podcast full of like hardcore real estate investors, and he started talking about how real estate is set up to screw the young because the old maintain ownership and just essentially just take money from the young and give it to the poor, give it to the old. And you could the host was phenomenal. He was, he guided it super well. But frankly, like, you can kind of tell it was like, this is not the guest they usually have. I think this guest is not the usual guest any podcast has.
I mean, you can kind of tell from his point of view he puts in his book that I feel like he wouldn't mesh well into any kind of like the typical guided conversation going on a podcast about whatever, like not the trash on the podcast, but like typically they're trying to push a particular narrative about whatever their subject matter is,
Mm-hmm.
And I'm saying that because I listen to a bunch of like clean tech and sustainability podcasts and stuff. And I feel like if they had him on the author here onto their podcast, it'd be like a lot of little tight-lipped smiles and stuff, like.
I think you're absolutely right. A lot of just like kind of, oh, we did not read his book thoroughly enough.
We read it too fast, or we skimmed it. We skipped that chapter,
Yeah. Speaking of which, let's do a little skim through this book. I think this book actually serves best to just skimming through, finding the facts that we like best, and just highlighting them. So I am going to throw it to you really quick to tell me about one of the things that really hopped out to you. Before that, this book covers 100 charts that tell the story of America currently. So from housing to wealth distribution to mobility of class, like there are a lot of just different facts that he pulls out and just says, this is true, this is true, this is true, this is true, and then he gives a brief, very brief, hey, this is why kind of it's messing us up as a country. I like it. I think and especially because Sydney, you actually mentioned you've read some of these statistics before, and
like probably 25% of them I've seen in other sources, that kind of stuff. And it's kind of reaffirming to see them republished somewhere else, and especially kind of reskin to kind of drive to a different message in some of these instances.
Agreed. Like that did a lot for my confidence in the data, was to know, oh, these have popped up before, and he's just kind of aggregated them all into one spot, which is neat.
So I will say, and the thing that's got both of us when we're reading it on the Kindle, going off of the percent left in the book thing.
Mm-hmm.
He does have quite a references section, so much so that you finish the book at 57%. Because I was reading it, I was like, man, this book club is this week pretty soon. I'm only at like 55. I've got to really get after it. And then the book was over, and I was like, oh, fantastic. But
yeah, and I guess that's a good thing and a bad thing. Like if you think, oh well, it's a lot shorter of a book than you think, but on the other side, he did his homework, and the part of homework that most people don't do, which is actually going through and getting all the references and having his work cited. It lends a lot more gravitas to what he's saying. And
So I actually had to think about the works cited. One's a skeptical and one's like a really like I think a useful thought to have when you're reading a book like this. Number one, who the hell is going to go check?
right, yeah,
Who's going to be like, you know what, this guy has 100 pages of references here. Honestly, I see that and I'm like, well, he must have done it right. Like just the length of it is enough of a check mark for me.
he just overwhelms you with facts. It's like
Yeah, it's like
that you
half
just
of these could be fake, and I wouldn't go through the effort of like validating it or not. But secondly, I think when you're reading this kind of thing, and you get across a chart or a factoid about like a particular subject that's interesting, like there's one section that he was just talking about the evolution of higher education and its cost and payoffs and that kind of stuff over the last like 70 years. Really interesting stuff. It's not something that I've ever done any reading on or anything. And if I wanted to, I think the references section would be really good for me to be like, you know what, I want to do more reading on that subject.
mm,
I'm gonna go find that reference and like peruse it, right? Maybe not read it, maybe not read the 100-page report someone wrote about higher education and costs, but definitely go like, go read its executive summary. Um, I think that's the real use of references section like this in this book is just pointing you where you want if you want to go find more information.
yeah, that's a great. I've always wanted to be that kind of person who reads a really heavy, scientific research book and just uses that to hop, skip, and jump through. Hold on, let me flash to you really quick doing that.
Oh. I've read like 2 other books at the scale right now. So
yeah. Yeah, well, you've always been the man that I wanted to be. So
you can just say you want to be me, Drake. It's okay. It's all right.
You're right. Like you're not wrong. I mean, look at me trying to imitate you with my long hair.
A couple more months to go on that one, on the hair.
Let's forget the fact that I was the one who started doing it first. My hair just for some reason doesn't freaking grow nearly as fast as yours does.
Long like late college, I think, maybe early college. I don't even remember, but we were much younger.
Yeah. But enough of my adulation of my co-host. Let's let that co-host dive into what was. Let's each do a fact. Let's each do one part that would just really jumped out to us as probably the most important. Or you don't need to put that pressure on yourself of most important. Just tell me something that like is one of the charts or one of the facts that he brought to your attention. Do you have one?
So yeah, I have one, and I'm a bit of a pessimist, right, in general. And so I like when things align with my pessimism. And he made a little point in here on page 251. Let me see if it actually. I might align well with the book too. I'm curious if my Kindle notes lines up with the book. But no, it does not. Where'd it go? Oh, it's about institutions and trust in institutions and that kind of stuff.
Damn it!
And what's that? It might not be the same one. We'll see. And I mean, it was a really interesting point because I'm really interested in how different generations view the progression of society as they go through it, right? And so you have people who grew up in the 1950s alive still, and you have folks who are growing up in the 2000s, right? And the viewpoint the folks who grew up in the 50s have of how the world works is just fundamentally different than the folks who grew up now, right? Mm. And tragically, I mean, a lot of the sources I've read indicate that folks in the 50s believed more positively about the future.
Yeah.
They were more willing to think they would have a better life than their parents, and they had more capability to do that too, which is interesting as well. But we could get into the feedback loop back and forth of whether or not believing you can have a better life than your parents versus actually being capable. There's a bunch of nuances there. But specifically into the like area of institutions, because the institutions when they originally founded, it was like we started this thing to go do something, and it was wonderful, right? It's like, hey, we want to go like win something, that you should be the best in the world or something, so we're going to make this an institution to do it. And that was a fantastic thing. But now folks don't really trust institutions, right? It's kind of like,
institutions have also betrayed trust a lot. where they're no longer trying to protect the consumer, grow the benefit of society, and then profit in addition to that. People have started to find that the only thing business owners and people care about is profit. They don't want to make the world a better place. The only reason they're working is in order to make money. They have no desire to increase society and make it better, which I don't think is true of everyone, but it's true of the people who are on top. Because in a capitalistic society, that's how we have the cream rise to the top is
That's a,
purely.
I think that's a really good distinction because like the degradation of the trust did not occur because of the folks decided they didn't want to trust these institutions, right? It degraded over time because their trust was continually degraded for very specific instances, right?
Because it'd be very different if companies made a bunch of money, but then they also pumped that money back into making better systems. And I don't mean they need to be charitable. I don't mean they need to, be giving their money away to the poor and doing alms and being good souls and all that. I don't. Yeah, they should. I think they should, but that's not necessarily how you can give back to society. It's pumping that money back into R&D. It's pumping that money back into infrastructure and systems that make the world more efficient, and then taking that efficiency and passing on those profits and that development to the greater whole. Versus what people are seeing happening is these efficiencies in the market are growing, and that there's becoming a larger profit margin, but the only people who are seeing that are the people at the top. People at the bottom aren't getting the benefit of efficiency. And I think this book goes into that, but I've just noticed that in a lot of different areas. There's something I want to say about that, but you look like you want to talk about it real quick.
I was saying the tragedy of that point you're talking about increasing profits, but the profits only going to the top 1% or the folks who hold direct access to those profits, is that I think it would take a particularly moral and upright person, and maybe my definition of morals is just fundamentally capitalistic, I don't know, to have done some form of work to create this enhanced profit stream, right? Being like, oh, okay, our profit stream used to be, 30 grand, random numbers here, and now it's 50 for the same, now it's 50. It would take a particularly moral or a particular type of person to be like, everyone else is okay right now. No one's complaining to me about the money they're making, right? Everyone's still working. Everyone's still doing their job. I'm going to reinvest this profit stream back to everyone, not just me, right?
Exactly. That the necessity for them to pay out is not there, but they do it anyway because they can. Like,
Yeah.
or I'm better than my competitors, and so I can cut my prices and to undercut them, but to or no, my competitors are charging a certain amount and people are willing to pay it, so I can charge that same amount, even though I know that I could actually charge less because of my systems. I'm going to continue to charge the market value because I see that it's market value, and that's
People
what
are
people
going to
are
pay
willing
it.
to charge. Yeah, people are willing to pay it. People are willing to pay it. It would take a very moral individual to say, no, I can take a profit cut and still make a viable business while doing while while cutting costs for the consumer, and just not pad my profit. Or I think the better option is just taking that money and pumping it into R&D. Make our microchips better, make our cars better, make our infrastructure better. Like,
justify the increased cost, right? That's the real best option. I mean, for your company, and I think, society in general, right? Is if you can actually give us a reason to justify the increased cost, there's a trade-off that's been accepted at that point, right? It's not just someone blindly getting gouged, right? It's like, I'm paying more for this chip because it's a better chip, because the R&D you've invested in, that kind of thing. But the original quote that started this whole discussion was, institutions, another key feature that distinguishes us from less successful species, are now seen as harmful. They're no longer the mechanisms that put us on the moon or turn back Hitler, but entities to be distrusted and defunded, and this is a self-fulfilling prophecy as they become less effective. Because naturally, as they become less effective, you're like, why are we spending money on this? This doesn't make sense. And so you take more money from it, and it becomes less effective, right? And so honestly, you really, I think his point about the self-fulfilling prophecy makes it clear that you need to hit a big old freaking reset button, right? And just crush them all. and then restart.
Was he specifically talking about government institutions there, or was he talking about
We're talking about
corporations?
in general.
No?
But government institutions are the big bright ones that make good examples.
Yeah, because those are bloated. Like every government institution is bloated because of a lot of reasons. But I also think one of them is because they've taken upon themselves to feel that they need to be a job creation mechanic where like essentially because the idea is actually pretty solid to think okay instead of giving people unemployment and money for not working, we give them a job that anyone can do or may not even be necessary, and they get the money they would do during unemployment, but at least they're working on something. And I think the government has taken that strategy and has ran with it, and I don't think that the results are as good as we would hope.
If you're interested in that mechanism, what was the name of that book? It's in here somewhere. It's about here. I think the deficit. Is it? Yeah. This is a book called The Deficit Myth by Stephanie Kelton. And this is one of those things I'm talking about that was referenced in this book that I've read previously. And the central thesis of this book is it's around modern monetary theory, which is that
Taxes.
well,
Sorry.
it's that so modern fiat currencies are generated and given value by the government and people, right? They're no longer gold backed. And so the government can literally just create money until something disastrous happens, right? And there's a window where it can go through that process and really affect positive change, right? Until the money they've spent has done enough to dampen the market in general. And so the more capabilities your society has, the more the more money the government can create like that. And it's a really interesting point they're making here. You want to read about money theory? It's pretty cool.
Great. Funnily enough, I've actually read that book, so that's why.
Really?
Yeah, that's why modern monetary theory is actually very interesting to me.
Did we read it for this?
No, we didn't. We just independently we
Wow.
both read that book.
Yeah. Lovely.
Lovely. Okay, so I'll take that to transition over to my quote or not my quote, but I want to talk about social media but specifically he brings up a point of like the beginning quote of this I think is one of the best parts because I love this quote before I've read it here and I'll love it after. If you are not paying, then you are not the customer, you are the product. Love that phrase.
Yeah.
And
that's a good phrase to keep in the back pocket as you navigate the internet, right? Like
yes, always remember that whatever you're watching, whatever you're doing, if you're not paying, then you are not the consumer, you are the product. And that's only really become a thing within the past decade or 2 decades with Facebook and Google creating like this advertising, and we're in an attention economy where we're paying for products through attention. And I do think there's some value in it. I think people need to be aware of it and careful about it. But I don't see that there's a problem with it. Like you're just paying with your attention. And at least people are now getting paid for their attention with products, whereas before, like you want it. I think advertising has its place, but when you see the staggering numbers that go along with it, specifically how it's changed to digital with Facebook and Google just dominating the advertising space, it's caused I think the most detrimental thing that it's caused news organizations to just go by the wayside. And because attention is now the currency, you're trading attention for money. Now attention is the only thing that matters. Truth doesn't matter. Quality doesn't matter. The only thing that matters is attention. And that is what is bad about an attention economy. I don't think an attention economy in itself is a bad thing. This idea that advertising can supplement, subsidize, and support organizations, entertainment, products, apps, all that kind of thing. I don't think that in itself is bad. But when people hone in and capitalize on exactly how to monetize your attention, and we find that the best way to do that is not through facts, it's through emotion, that's when I think we have a problem. because now you're buying attention not with quality of product and not with quality that will support a greater society. You're the only quality factor, the only key metric that matters. And Facebook has come out and said this, Google has come out and said this, or not said this, but memos have been out, is they don't care how they get attention. All they care about is keeping you on their platform. However they have to do that, they're going to do that. And so that's what I think the problem with the attention economy is. It's not it's flawed. It's not necessarily bad, but it's because people pursue it the way they do it. You know what I mean?
I think like the attention problem, the attention economy like problem you're discussing is really like just it comes down to two things: the inaccuracies that it portrays, like you're talking about here, right? It makes money off of being wrong and being accurate and being emotionally, triggering, right?
Mm.
And then it also makes money off of of incrementally breaking up your attention, right? You remember a while ago when Robinhood? It was like a while ago. It was like during the COVID, like economic post-COVID stock boom, or whatever. When Robinhood switched over to fractional shares,
Yeah.
it was like, oh, anyone can buy fractional shares now. Whoa, right? And it was a huge deal, and I'm sure Robinhood made a ton of money for doing the headache to like figure out how that works, how to set that up. Because now anyone could go, like, you could break up the trading unit into however small the piece you needed, right? And I think that's the real tragedy of what the attention like economy has done, is because the best way to make the most money is to make your base unit as small as possible and interchangeable as possible, right? And so they've gone through, and it used to be I could sit down and watch a video for like 45 minutes. And then videos got shorter, and they got shorter, and they got shorter, and they got shorter, and now they're 15 seconds long, right? Because if it's a 15-second long video, the throughput they can cram through you in 30 minutes is so much higher than they could in a 30-minute long video by itself.
Their goal is to increase the number of clicks and attention. And it turns out that it is much easier to keep someone engaged for 30 minutes with short clips than it is to keep someone engaged for 30 minutes with a long through line. And just because something's easier doesn't necessarily make it better. And I think
And
that's something we're losing.
you mentioned like because I'm pretty like I try to be pretty altruistic and like believing that the central thrust of society-wide efforts should really, at its core, better the function of society, right? I think that's what everyone would like, right? And I think that that's the real damaging thing that the attention economy does to folks in general, right? It's the degradation of your attention span. Because anything that you need to do that actually requires work and actually has the opportunity for real payoff requires you to sit down and work
Nah.
for like
Nah,
a
dude,
period of
nah.
time.
Dude, I don't want to do no work. Dude, just make it easy for me.
I wish they could invent work that I could do for 15. I could literally have 18 tasks in front of me and just do 15 seconds of each all day long. I would go home not having finished a damn thing, but I would feel so productive, man.
I'm working for 15 seconds on this. Oh, I'm working for 15 seconds on this. Oh, I'm working for 15 seconds on this. Yeah,
What's
no,
funny
you
is
have
that if you sat down at a desk and you knew we were doing a psychology experiment or whatever, and I was like, hey, there's 8 things in front of you. I want you to cycle for 15 seconds or 30 seconds. We'll be generous. You have 30 seconds to work on these. I want you to cycle through these. You'd be like, this is ridiculous. No one could ever get anything positive done, right?
Oh, it'd be impossible.
But then you sit down on your phone and do that for an hour trying to enjoy yourself, right?
Or trying to absorb information. Like
Yeah.
you trick your mind into thinking that, oh, I'm learning something or I'm entertained. No, I constantly find myself after 30 minutes, I'll be like, I can't remember oh, this was a beautiful one. This is a great tip for people. When you're scrolling through, stop and see if you can recall what the video 3 videos prior was. And if you can't,
hurt myself like that, man.
what'd you say?
I'd rather not hurt myself like that. That would just hurt my feelings, because
It hurts because you realize real quick you're not actually watching. You realize real quick that you don't actually care. All you're doing is popping your dopamine receptors and becoming a jelly jelly robot that you might as well be hooked up into the matrix and be pumped full of exactly the right amount of serotonin and dopamine to make yourself content and happy, because you're not actually doing anything with yourself or your time.
Wow, man. Shout out to the motivation section of YouTube Shorts, man. That'll eat you up, dude. Oh my god. You're like, oh, look, I'm such a highly motivated individual. Look at my YouTube Shorts section doing nothing but motivation. It's like this little bit of like, just like, stroking your ego while also trapping you there, making you actually do nothing and clearly be unmotivated. But
yeah, and before we move away from this, because I do want to wrap up, but before we move away, it's not bad. The attention economy is not bad. YouTube Shorts is not bad. TikTok is not bad. YouTube is not bad. It is how those things are used that is bad. It is the fact that just like cigarettes or alcohol, people can get addicted, and they're going to use a very good tool to then do harmful things to themselves. Because learning is not bad. Ali Abdul, I think his name's Ali Abdul, Stephen Graham or Bigger Pockets. They're not bad to have their information out there and to be engaging and trying this attention economy. They're providing value that is true value. But when you never act upon the lessons that they give, or ever actually learn, you're not. That's when it becomes bad, is when you pump so much of your time and yourself and your energy and the life that you've been given into just consuming media rather than consuming information and processing it and interacting with the world in a better way. That's when it becomes bad. That's when it becomes, you're not actually using a tool, you're being used. And that's why that's important.
I think if there was a way to build something where you had to use it with intention, it could stay solely in that you're using it as a tool mindset, like you're talking about there, Drake. Because the danger to me, this is just very anecdotal, so it might be incorrect, is when I'm using that kind of thing without intention.
Yeah.
Right? I'm just scrolling, right? Just literally not even really quite aware of my existence at the moment. Whereas if I'm like, hey, I want to go learn more about my tennis serve or something, right? And then I go spend 30 minutes looking at tennis serve videos, intentionally trying to learn more. It's a really different mechanism,
Yeah.
And unfortunately, I don't think there's a way to build an app like that to do that.
Yep. Any last words?
For Adrift in general?
Adrift, yep.
Oh, wow. You're cutting this one short. Yeah, one more thing about this whole, like, narrative structure around, the attention economy and, how it's affected, capitalism in general. And actually, these are good points we discussed, and institutions. A quote on page 63, the nation once idolized astronauts and civil rights leaders who inspired hope and empathy. Now it worships tech innovators who generate billions and move financial markets. We get the heroes we deserve. And adding on to the tech innovators, I would say we definitely idolize those folks, like, entrepreneurs, right, who really can't tell you quite what they do, but they clearly make a bunch of money. I think this point is really, really genuine and good to consider. We get the heroes we deserve, right? If you idolize the wrong kinds of endeavors, everyone will do the wrong kinds of endeavors, right? That's the central success tenet, which is
we tell people, we tell ourselves what we value, and we get what we value. And so I completely agree. I'll end with remember what you're sharing. For every standard deviation increase of anxiety elicited, the probability of an article making the most emailed list went up by 21%. For awe, it went up 30%, but the most powerful emotion was anger, increasing virality by 34%. Please spread positivity and love. Don't spread things because they make you angry. Try and spread things that make you positive. This has been Read Between the Lines. Thank you for going behind the cover and between the lines, and we hope to see you next time. Bye. $30.
Prime.
Yeah,
my comment about being short was really more for the narrative than anything.
So people know, like, oh, this is short. This is short. That was good. I think that was a good, solid discussion. I've also been thinking about, like, what our goals with this should be. You know what I mean?
This being
like
discussion.
Yeah, with the book club, because I like the idea. I like I want to get on a phone call with you more often before we do book club, like how we did on Thursday. And I want that to be, we're in the car or whatever, and we're just talking for hours and just meandering through the book. And then we pick out, what about the book what through line do we want to discuss about the book? Like, or what do we want this podcast to be about?
I think the more important thrust there isn't necessarily having a standardized goal per book, but having a goal when we get into the discussion.
Yeah.
Right. Because different books are very different in the kind of things we want to discuss in them. So really just having a point, right? And that will help a ton.
What goal do we want for the podcast? What do we
to be interesting enough to make people want to pick up the book and read it. Right? Okay. Or not necessarily pick up the book and want to read it, but be interested in the topic, right? Or be interested in I think that be interested in the act of reading in general, right? Is a better way to phrase that. Because honestly, I don't care one way or the other if the podcast we do on a particular book makes someone want to go read that book. Honestly, I'm fine if they I've got enough. That's whatever, right? On that book. But really just driving for more, maybe I want to go learn more about modern monetary theory, right? Something like that. I don't know. I think that's the real value, right?
Making them want being advertising for these books. We're buying into the attention economy. I think I want to think about that a lot of because that's why I want to have the phone calls, where we can just talk about the books. But then I do want to figure out, okay, so what do we want this podcast to be about, so that we can talk about the books in general, but then narrow down after the phone call, be like, okay, what parts of this book help promote what we want to do with this podcast?
And when you say podcast, you mean the podcast thrust in general and how it relates to that specific book, right?
Yes. So having a goal for the podcast and how and what parts of this book help us achieve the goal of our podcast. So if our goal is to increase the desire for reading, then okay, so what do we? So yeah, if our only goal is to we want people to read more books, we want to elicit excitement over about reading, then we talk about the books in general, every mundane detail, everything that we think is cool, and then the last 10 minutes of that phone call is what do we think are the most highlightable points to what are the things about this book that make it worth reading?
Have a central goal for the podcast, and then for each podcast episode, what goals what goal do we want to hit with that book to hit that overall goal?
Exactly. Right? What about this book pushes us towards that greater goal of getting people to read? Yeah. Of getting people to pick up a book.
Mm-hmm. And to be fair, I'm just spitballing with ideas for the reason for the podcast, but very open for addition and changes to that kind of thing, right?
Yeah. We want people to pick up books. Okay. Yeah, I think. Yeah, I want to think about that more, but yeah, I think we need to come up with a goal for the podcast, and then go back to having our kind of various discussion with just you and me, just on the phone, and then when we sit down, it's more laser focused of the pieces of the book that support that goal.
I think that helps in a lot of senses. It helps drive a meaningful conversation, right? Mm-hmm. And it also helps drive a meaningful conversation in 30 minutes, which is pretty nice.
Because then we can do 2 books in an hour and a half, rather than 2 books in 5 hours. And then our conversation, our meandering 2.5 hour conversations, can be on the phone while we're walking around, doing laundry, driving. We can have those 2.5 hour, 5 hour conversations, but they're we don't have to sit down and dedicate our entire day to those conversations. Does that make sense? Yeah, I think that's a good idea for both of us.
And it also that'll make me read books faster too, frankly. Having a
why am I reading this?
Yeah, thrust to read it. Right, it's easy enough if I'm reading a book scale I was interested in.
Ooh, dude. What or who are the people that would read this book? Who are the people that should read this book?
That's a really good idea. Because I'm pretty sure one of the central tenets of like online stuff is you got to connect with a specific audience, right?
Yes, and say like, hey, our goal is to figure out for people
Who should read this book? Oh my god! Yeah, thumbs up to that one, man. That's perfect.
Who are the people that reach the book? Like let's look at scale. I mean, engineers, city planners, anyone. I think at the beginning of every podcast, we should say these are the 3 types of people that I think should read this book.
And keep it to 3, because of course you can go on and on.
Yeah. So these are the top 3 types of people that should read this book.
Yeah.
Yeah. Should we each do 3, or should we come up with 3 beforehand?
Each doing 3 is too much.
Yeah, each doing 3 is too much. How should we?
So it's coming up with 3 beforehand.
Should we, say again?
So it was coming up with 3 beforehand.
Yeah, I was about to say. Or should we do it should we do it very quickly at the beginning? Or yeah, maybe each of us has 3, and then by the end of it, we vote. Like the podcast is us bringing examples and essentially debating why we think our 3 should be the 3. And at the end of it, that's when we show like these are the 3 that we think are most likely going to enjoy. These are the 3 type of people that we think are most likely going to enjoy this book.
I like that, like very much. Like I think that would apply very well to a subset of the books we read. Very, very well to a subset of the books we read, right? But some of them would be like a little too guided. I think if that makes sense.
You're thinking mostly like thinking especially like for the nonfiction.
Yeah, it's hard. It's hard to like drive to that conversation similarly for a lot of different things.
I don't know. I think it's harder, but I think it actually would be. I think it would actually be more fun with fiction, because then you stop becoming like, okay, engineers, scientists. You become okay. I think it should be people who struggle with like drug addiction. I think people who struggle with mental health, they should be the ones that read this book. And then also, fantasy nerds, they should be the ones like, people who like, if you like this, then you'll like this.
I think that's a really important point a really important thing to include in every episode, but I don't think it should be the thrust of every episode.
Okay. Then maybe, what if we do 3 things? So types of people, we choose a profession that we think would enjoy the book. We choose a personality type that would enjoy the book, and then we choose a if you like this, then you'll like this. So like I think painters would like, I think artists would like this book. Or I think digital artists specifically. Like I'm thinking Black Prism. I think theater light technicians would like this book. Profession. I think personality types. Hold on, I'll have to think on that one. But third one, if you like this. If you like Stormlight Archives, you'll like this book. Yeah.
So my thing about structure, but I support that entirely. I think that's a little overmuch.
Okay.
Trying to like prescribe that much.
Okay.
But I do think the central tenet of that, what you're getting at there, is super critical to include in every episode. Right? Like
who should read this book?
Saying it, like actually making that a part of the episode for most episodes, and considering it for every single one. Right? Considering it and making that like a driver in the conversation.
So not necessarily specifically like, oh, these are the 3 types of people, but just instead of being, we're taking you behind the books and between the lines of our favorite books, that's not the purpose of this podcast anymore. The purpose of this podcast is not to take you behind the books, not behind the cover and between the lines. The purpose of this podcast is to tell you who would want to go behind the cover and who would want to go between the lines of this book. Like that's the point of this. That is our goal with this podcast is to help you save your time.
I think well then you get into this weird dynamic where you don't want to spoil the book, right? So I think the real point, the real thrust of that, considering who would like to read this book, is really to like steer our conversation, right?
Yeah.
Because if we're reading a book, and to steer our conversation and like towards what diversions we should take in the conversation, right? Because if we're reading a book like Scale and we decide, engineers would fucking love this book, right?
Yeah.
We don't need to spend time talking about the writing style.
I understand now. Yeah.
So not necessarily to drive the specific like conversation. So we hit, if you like this, you should read this. If you like this, you should read this. But really to make that episode of the podcast much more palatable to the perceived audience of that book.
Oh, and I think, I know you don't like structure, but I think structurally, I think it would help is if the points we make, we call out the people who would enjoy the book for this reason. So if we're like, hey, we are talking about narrative structure, or like we're talking about the writing specifically for like Black Prism would be a good example. I think poets would like this book because of the language and the literary style. It's very.
I think that just flows organically, right?
Yeah,
that's an organic result of proper discussion. It makes sense. And then, so with consideration of who we think the target audience for the book should be, or who would enjoy, not target audience, who would enjoy the book, right? With consideration of that, what's the goal then? You know what I mean?
Because the goal is no longer. Because the goal wouldn't really be get people to read more books. Well, I mean,
the goal very much can be that for the podcast at large. It's just each episode focuses on a different kind of type of people.
Yeah, I think the goal. I think maybe the goal is to save people time. There are so many books out there. Like we try.
Does that make you passionate? Does that make you want to get up on Saturday morning and talk about books?
Well, okay, I'm trying to get there, dude. I'm not there. I'm just trying to work towards it. Okay, I'm not saying this is the end, but I'm trying to say like, yeah. I mean, our goal is to help people find the books that they're gonna love. Help people find the books that are gonna turn into the books that they want to keep on their shelves.
Like that.
Yeah.
I get it.
All right. So I might start opening with taking you behind the covers and between the lines of our favorite books to help you find out if they're your favorite books too.
That's a good starter.
Yeah. All right. We'll start that way now. Because repeating that will help me remember like, okay, this is our goal. Hey, and thinking about, okay, all right. Speaking of, what's one do you want to do next?
I'm great pick.
Are you ready for Scale?
Yep.
Because you're definitely leading this one. All right, let me hit record.
I don't like having my guitar in the frame.
You feel like too much of a poser?
Yeah.
All right.
If more people knew I can't play guitar, I just like not being able to play it.
Yeah. 3. Hello, my avid readers. You have fallen your. What do we want to call our bibliophiles? What do we want to call? Is that correct? Bibliophiles?
Yeah, it is the pretentious thing we discussed earlier, man. You can't open with bibliophiles. That's
sycophants.
Oh no, that's actually the wrong word.
I know. Well, now I can't even think. What do we call people who actually enjoy listening to us? I mean, they're probably going to be pretentious, so maybe we do call them bibliophiles.
Pretense.
Say what? Cretins?
Pretense.
Pretense? We call them
like folks who are pretentious, but I was just joking. It's a joke.
I was like, well, that's a word, pretense. So I was
No, not pretense.
yeah, pretense. I get it.
Pretense.
I get it. I get it. We could call them cretins. Call them goblins. Um, no, these aren't goblins. My Greenville goblins are my goblins.
Also, I hate goblins. I hate it.
Hate too it. Bad. Too bad, buddy. It's too late, dude.
I can't stand him, man. Every time I look at that Discord, I'm like, ugh.
You should have come up with the mascot.
I should have cared more.
Yep. You cared too much too late, my friend.
Yep.
All right, pretons. No, that's not gonna make sense.
Even the derogatory fucking names, dude. Just like, I don't know, call them avid readers. That works fine.
All right, fair enough. All right, man. My bad. All right. Well, good thing. I guess it never stopped recording. Or hopefully it started recording earlier. Oh boy. No, it had to have. If not, I'll go pull it from YouTube. 3. Hello, my avid readers. You have found yourself in Read Between the Lines, where we take you behind the cover and between the lines of some of our favorite books and figure out if they could be your favorite books too. Joining me this week is Sydney Key, who has scaled massive heights and come back to you to tell the tale. Sydney, say hello.
How's it going, y'all? Excited to talk about scale because Drake's not going to be contributing much to this conversation except for sounding board and input post major points. So we'll get into it.
Called out early and absolutely correct. We are going back to this book from a long hiatus. And
how long ago was that, Drake? Was that November last year or was it December? I think it was December.
I think it was December. It was a full, but it's November, a full month.
Frank. It might have been November.
It might have been November. All that to say, Sydney has done an incredible job of consolidating the book and really diving into it because he, as an engineer, really liked this book. And we think other engineers will like it too. So he has distilled some of the book, and I do remember a lot of it, but I'm excited to see what points he brought out and highlighted. So without further ado, I think I'm going to kick this over to you, Sydney, and why don't you dive us straight into scale?
Perfect. I do want to start with, though, I get why Drake here didn't finish it. I understand completely. Like, it's fair, right? Because I was reading this thing, and I'll be honest.
Why does that hurt more? Why did that feel
why
more?
Why does it hurt that it was fair for you to miss it?
Yeah.
You not finish?
All right.
Because I was reading it, and like for the first, I don't know, quarter of the book, right? It's all exposition and preface information and stuff, and it's like it was a slog to get through it, and I'm interested in the topic, right? But then after that first quarter ended, I just devoured this thing, and it's like a 400-page book or something like that. I think maybe 300, 402, yeah. And I just ate it up because after you get through that preface section, Drake, that hamstrung you. It really is quite good, and there's like a lot of good points just tied into each other and creating a narrative.
You know what this reminds me of? This reminds me of all the anime weebs that are like, you gotta get into One Piece. After the first 500 episodes, it gets good, I promise. That's what this reminds me of.
Fortunately, with the way this book's written and like the style of his writing, it means that if the subject matter he's covering is not interesting, it is boring. Right? If you don't have any interest in it. So like the first quarter is a boring section of book. So I like, disclaimer on this one, start at page 150. Like, frankly.
Do you feel like if you're not super interested in like the engineering and the technical aspects of it, that you can jump in to page 150, 200 and feel like you have, like, could you even understand what's going on, or would you be interested in it post that exposition era?
I think that's a great question, but it depends on how like good you are taking things at face value, right? How much of your own validation you require to believe a fact, right? That you read in a book, because the real central point of that first quarter of the book is so that when he makes points later,
you trust
you can understand why his point is proved.
So right? if you're a gullible lemon like me, you could just chop in at 200 and just be like, look, I'll just believe what you say. I might doubt it, but
there are probably like 5 or 6 points he made where I like underlined them because I went through and did a review last night and wrote up my like important thoughts on the book and things, that kind of thing. And I had 5 or 6 points. I was like, that's a thin point. And there's some as I was going through there, like, some of his points are not well substantiated. Really, they're kind of he's kind of grasping for some of these.
And I'm sure those are the points where I would grab onto them and just be like, "This is truth. This is the truth, the only truth, and nothing can change my mind."
The kind of thing the kind of thing you go to your family Christmas party with, just tucked in your back pocket, ready to whip it out at the slightest provocation.
The thing that you have not Google searched to verify, the little detail that a friend 7 years ago told you and like told you as fact, and you never went and fact checked him ever again, and just you whip that out at every party. That's what that's what those points are.
You built your central identity around it.
Yep.
All right, but before we get off this, I have one point. Drake, you need to read the last chapter of this book.
I know.
Like, I think you can read the last chapter stands on its own, and it's short. I think everyone should read the last chapter, but you specifically need to.
All right, I promise right here, my hand is up. I promise I will read the final chapter before our next book club.
I don't think it's even that long, frankly. See,
it's more of the mental anguish.
It's literally 20 pages.
It's 20 pages of me lifting the black miasma that has descended upon my brain around this book.
It's 20 pages of torture.
All right. So dive us in. Tell us what is one point, besides the final chapter, what is one point of this book that you think every person should know and every person should read? Like if you had to tell someone, you had them for 45 seconds at a Christmas party, and they said, "Look, I'm about to go be able to make one decision in front of Congress, the House, the president. I'm about to be able to tell them one thing that they will make action and change." What would you want that one person walking out armed with as far as information or possible change?
I hate where you took that example, Drake, because my answer is so poor for it. So the central thrust of this book, scale the universal laws of life, growth, and death in organisms, cities, and companies. The central thrust of this guy is that to properly consider how something works and functions and what its important give and takes are, where it flexes around, to properly understand a system or anything, you need to view it as the system holistically. You can't separate these individual variables in and out and expect your judgment and action to have the effects you intended to have. So that's kind of the whole point he's looking at here. But give me one second. I think my monitor has been unplugged.
Can you, when you have a chance, can you give an example of that?
Yeah. Have you ever heard of cane toads?
I have not.
All right, so cane toads are toads in Australia. They are not originally from Australia. They're horribly invasive, and they cause a huge issue because they're poisonous, and you can't eat. Nothing can eat. And they had a beetle problem in Australia, I think 50s or 60s or something like that. They're like, you know who eats beetles? You know who? They're actually called cane beetles. You know who eats cane beetles? Cane toads. Let's get some cane toads in here. Toads got in there. Fucking love the beetles, man. Excuse the language. They love the beetles. Ate them all up, and then there were way too many toads. And the toads ruined the environments they were in. Huge issue in Australia, Australian ecology, because they didn't understand the system they were throwing stuff into, right? And it's that kind of stuff. It's before you start messing with things, consider know what you're messing with first.
But I think one of the issues with that is it's impossible. That doesn't that just paralyze change though? Because how can we move forward? We have these huge, these huge systems already in these cities, and there are so many variables. How do you move forward without knowing exactly what might happen, or how do you know exactly what will happen, or what variants of
so just so everyone
do
knows,
you accept?
So just so everyone knows, it's 10:30 right now, 10:30 a.m. a.m. where I am, and I didn't expect to be attacked quite so personally this early in the morning. Because that's fundamentally my issue with trying to decide what I want to do with my life, right? Is because like there's so much stuff going on in these systems. I feel like I need to understand the system completely before I make an action choice, right? So you're asking the wrong person on that one, bud. Frankly, I couldn't tell you. Like, I know it's important to I guess you consider all of the facts and interwoven webs of like cause and effect for as long as you can until you have to make an action, which is a cop out of an answer if there ever was one.
It's a little bit. It's a little bit. Let's hone in on. So, what exactly do you want to talk about with this grid? What about this book have you pulled out?
That's kind of the end of my point about the holistic thinking he's trying to convey here, because it's honestly, I think if you're interested in holistic thinking, read the whole book. I mean, that's why this book's 400 pages. Really, this book is not 400 pages because of the author's interest in scale and life and death. It's 400 pages because he's trying to push for a change of thinking, right? Besides from that holistic thinking viewpoint, this book's just full of tons of interesting stuff, man. It's called Scale because what started the author down this rabbit hole of getting interested in multidimensional thinking and all this kind of stuff. It's because he was curious. He was like, he was sitting around. He's a physicist by training. And he was sitting around when he was 50. He was like, why do we die? And he went and looked it up. And there's no scientific literature on why things die. And he was like, that's weird because there's all the scientific literature you could ever need for why things are alive. Mm-hmm. Right? His point is that there are three objectively significant times in an organism's life: when it is born, when it becomes alive, when it reproduces, and when it dies. And the first two have all kinds of detail on them, on the research, and death doesn't have much. So he was curious about that, and so he got started looking into metabolism and all that kind of stuff, and that got him interested in scale. Because turns out there's some really cool system details that work around metabolism in organisms. And for folks that don't know, metabolism is like the rate that you burn energy to stay alive, right? Or do things in general. And that can be projected out from the metabolism of an individual person like me, right? Or it can be projected out to be the metabolism of a city or a country, right? Or the world, frankly, or societies in general.
I think that is one thing that. Sorry to interrupt you, but I think that is actually one thing that was really cool to me when reading through this. Was he did break down the difference, and he went from the smallest animal to the biggest city and showed the continuous line of scale that happens upon metabolism and death. And I don't remember the exact details of it, but it's an exponential curve of how big you're able to be with how little calories you need. Or you might be able to tell that in more detail. But he goes into that of how organisms scale with both size and lifespan.
I think it's just so for me personally, I think all the beauty you need in the world is out there in the world. Right? I don't need much more personal reason to think things are beautiful and amazing, right? And that's why I love this book, because it's turns out the same scaling laws that describe the organization of bacteria colonies describe the organization of Paris. And it's just so cool. That's insane to me, right? It's like look at folks running around thinking we're all the shit in the world, we're the fanciest things ever exist, right? And we're literally going through the same development cycles that bacteria colonies do when they're growing, right? Like there's a really cool picture on I don't remember what page of the book it was, of a picture of a bacteria colony growing, zoomed in, microscopic, and then a picture of Paris. And damn it, if they don't look very similar.
It blows my mind. It blows my mind that these patterns keep popping up in nature.
Let's talk about some of those specific patterns because they're really interesting.
Yes, please.
The reason these patterns exist is because there's only so many ways you can fill space constructively, right? Because 3D matter is constrained to exist in three-dimensional space, right? You can't get around that. And so there's certain things that designated by laws of physics around efficiencies that have to function, right? And so when you extrapolate these all out, you get these laws, And a really cool one is for every doubling of a creature's size, right? So if you have me, and then you have me double the size, you increase its the efficiency of its metabolism by 25%. So that's why whales are able to exist, because if the metabolism of whales of like an animal is scaled linearly, and it was that you scaled from like a mouse to a whale, the whale would have to eat so much freaking food. It'd be insane, right? And whales do eat so much food; they actually eat 1,000,000 calories a day, which is
Yeah.
crazy.
Yeah,
Um,
but proportionally, it's not as much as if it.
Proportionally, it is like literally like a 100th of what you would have expected them to do if you just linearly scaled up the calorie consumption of a mouse. Because the calorie consumption of a mouse is actually inefficient, and that's why. And then like, and that's just
as
crazy to
things
me.
as things get bigger, they get more efficient.
They get much more. Yeah.
Yeah, they get much more efficient. And he actually continued to use the examples beyond just mice and humans and whales. He went into looking at cities. Looking If you look at a
It applies
city
the
as
same way.
yeah, if you look at a city as if it was an animal, it scales at the same mathematical predictable amount as like
Yep.
according to GDP. That's insane to me.
Wild, right? And so like, one of the central theses in this book is that one of the reasons that we've been able to enjoy what is effectively, super exponential growth at a society level of kinds of wealth creation and population, all that kind of stuff, is because we're hitting those efficiencies of scale, right? Where it's not linear, because in your brain linear is just as a line, and that increase can be crazy. It's not exponential, which there's actually a section here I want to get your take on, Drake, about what exponential really means.
Yep.
And it's super exponential, which means it's faster than exponential is the population growth and growth of like society at large, which has some pretty terrifying implications as far as what's going to happen when that growth stops. But so a whale is much more efficient than a mouse. Like like a gram cube of its tissue can live off of much less calorie intake, right? Because the distribution networks and they're more efficient, that kind of thing. In the same way, the pace of life decreases systematically in the same fashion with bigger size. So the rate of cellular respiration and cellular life and death in a mouse is much faster than the rate of cellular life and death in a whale.
He specifically calls out heartbeats, does he not?
Heartbeats are actually the same. It was wild at a bit of a discretion, but for all animals, right, they have the same number of heartbeats in their lifetime. Like, of course, there's some variation around
I
there.
intentionally let some silence there because I wanted that to sink in for a second. What he's saying is that every mammal, because I do think he specifies mammal, correct?
Yep.
That it's every mammal has the same number of heartbeats. The only difference is that a mouse versus a whale versus a human, their heart beats slower or faster.
Which is just insane to me. And then in the same sense, every mammal has the same blood pressure. Base level.
I forgot about that.
Yeah, every mammal has the same blood pressure. And blood speeds, which is wild. Sorry, not blood speeds. Same blood pressure. And so the heart of a mouse has to work a lot harder than the heart of a whale. Because to keep that, and so does the circulatory system, because to keep such a small thing pressurized takes a lot more like wear and tear on the edges of the boundary structure and that kind of thing. Which is just wild. But what's really interesting to me in this book is, like I mentioned, the pace of life decreases systematically with increasing size. Then
I found that to be true.
Then wouldn't you think
as I've increased in size, the pace of my life has slowed.
My pace of life has certainly slowed down. And I'm really curious what kind of like implications that has for societal development, right? It's like, well, how come our pace of life isn't decreasing, right? Some people would say the pace of life is certainly increasing,
especially in cities, right? Like, because if his logic is extrapolated to cities the way that he wants it to, wouldn't that mean that a city should well, a city should slow down and a city's operations should slow down, but like look at New York, it's notoriously fast.
So I'm kind of curious about the implications there because like, is that why we're dying slower? Life expectancies are getting longer, right? Is that part of it? Like the individual cycling of folks is getting longer periods, but the social life's speeding up. I'm not quite sure how that translates, which is kind of why I wish that he had gone into more detail in terms of his proof for those sections.
Hmm.
But I kind of understand why he didn't because there's some sections of the proof that I thought were boring. So, so I get it completely.
Yeah.
But there's actually a really interesting quote. Where is this at? On page 328. There's this. This is a quote from Johann Wolfgang von Goethe. Goethe. I don't know. Anyway, some Dutch philosopher from 1825, soon after the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. Everything nowadays is ultra. Everything is being transited continuously in thought as well as in action. No one knows himself any longer. No one can grasp the element in which he lives and works or the materials that he handles. Pure simplicity is out of the question, or of simplifiers we have enough. Young people are stirred up much too early in life and then carried away in the world of times. Wealth and rapidity are what the world admires. Like literally, it sounds like something someone could have written in the 1970s, right? Or in the 1990s. I think that's just so like telling of the human condition, right? They were complaining about in 1825.
Is that we're all everything is in comparison to what we know. He knew a slower pace of life. It sped up. To him, it was out of control. Like he only knew these words to describe it, which are the same ones that people use today of, oh, people are flung into the world too soon, and especially they're riled up to emotion, or I think you mentioned something about that. And I do like we're so yeah, I mean, but doesn't that mean we're as a society
Up, right?
Or does it, like, on an individual level we're speeding up but as a whole our society is slower, like things take longer to
That's a
move,
fair
to
point,
grow.
yeah, because like the impact of an individual actor has definitely decreased, right?
Yeah.
That's just the nature of more people, right? It's harder to have a significant impact with more people that exist doing significant impacts, right? Maybe that's the thrust of it.
Yeah. Well, I want to wrap this up and move into I want to end on a discussion of exponential. Hold on. Yeah, I want to end on a discussion of exponential because you brought up that actual definition, and I think it's important. I would love to I would love to talk about it because I think I know what you want to say, and it's a very interesting topic.
Well, my issue with it, and I think I might have said this to you before, Drake, is exponential is not a English word. Exponential is a math word that has made its way into English, right? And people use it to mean it's growing fast.
Yeah.
That is not what that means, right? People use it like a steep linear growth curve, meaning it's growing at a constant rate, but it's going up pretty quick, right? And it's just not the case, right? Let me see if I have any good graphs here. Oh, where's that bacteria? Where is that bacteria point? Where is it at? I'm gonna go find this. This whole thing is a really good example.
Yeah. My whole frustration with the inaccurate use of exponential is that people really don't get what it means, that it starts slow and ends fast. Like the change, like you said, it's not a steep linear curve, it's a gradual and then a spark up, which is why people don't think that they need to act quickly, because in their minds they're like, oh, it's just where they are on the point. They think, oh, it's just going to go, on a diagonal from there. No, it's going to increase the slope more and more and more. I don't know if you got a graph, but
he included a really good example here. All right. So imagine you have a cup of bacteria, right? It's a little cup, and you have put all the resources the bacteria need to grow to fill the cup up in there with them, right? And you put one bacteria in there, at like 12 o'clock, right? Something like that. And you want the bacteria to grow at a rate that they fill the cup up 12 hours later at noon. At what point, and they double every minute. They literally just double every single minute, right? At what point is the cup half full? And they're exhibiting classic exponential growth because the population doubles every minute. So 1, 2, 4, 6, 1, 2, 4, 8, 16, etc.
It's at 11:59, right?
Yeah, literally at 11:59. That's when the cup's half full.
Yep.
That exponential thing. Like that right there is the best example. I wish I'd heard this in school. Is the best example of what exponential growth really means. It means that cup is only half full a minute. You have 11 hours and 59 minutes of sustainable growth in that cup of bacteria. And then the last minute it collapses.
That's terrifying. That's
You know what's
terrifying
worse?
when you say, yeah, that's terrifying. And what is worse?
What's worse is that at 11:50, you can't even see bacteria in the cup.
And real quick, Squid, correct me if I'm wrong. The human population is exponential, correct?
Very exponential, yeah. Some would say super exponential. Yeah. At 11:50, you can't see bacteria in the cup. At 12 o'clock, the bacteria or 12:01, the bacteria are dead because they ate all the resources.
Well, I think that's a great place to end this podcast. Thank you, Squid, for diving in and really getting all that information. I'll let you give one last shout out and then we'll wrap it up.
I'm done. That's it.
Just like the population in a closed system that is experiencing exponential growth, we are out of here. Have a great day. Hope to see you next time. If we're here and not a victim of exponential growth. All right. And stop the recording. Damn, dude. Oh, where'd you go? Oh, well,
your connection has gotten bad.
I was about to say, I'm glad the connection sustained through that little bit there. Whew, that's heavy stuff, dude.
Yeah, dude. That's why I want to work in space. Because the only way to get around it is open the.
Oh, dang, dude. Right as we finish that one, the freaking.
Open the cup. That my download. Lightbringer, man.
Dude, you are jumping all over the place all of a sudden.
Oh, it's me.
Oh, it's you?
That sucks.
Yeah, well, I need to take a break anyway, so let's take a break for 5 and come back and see if your connection's any better. Sounds good? Alright. Take a break. I mean,
I gotta hype these folks up in Discord. What the fuck?